We are here with Mr. Rik Emmett. Welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here. We're going to do some talking about your brand new book here that just came out. Lay It on the Line, a backstage pass to rockstar adventure, conflict, and triumph. So, man, what a read. I felt like I was in one of your classes or something when you were teaching or something, the way you went into the detail on some of this stuff. So obviously you break down a lot of things in this book, about perspectives, music business, art of music. Never read, such a book that went through all these types of subjects before. The book's 300 pages long. You probably could have easily made it 500. So tell us about the whole process when you started initially writing it and how hard was it to decide what to include, what to leave out?
Um, it started because I wrote a poetry book, and then before I started shopping it around to publishers, I thought nobody's going to want a poetry book. So I'm probably going to have to try to pitch the thing like, well, if I give you the poetry book and you put it out, I'll give you a memoir too. And so that's when it started. Now, I should say I have a website with a members forum that's been around almost since the beginning of the internet, and so I knew at a certain point that I could ask my web person to consolidate all of the emails that I'd posted onto the forum. It's kind of like a blog, but it's more like somebody posts something up and says, "Hey, Rick, remember the time you played in, wherever, Houston in 1979, and this happened, and blah blah blah. Do you remember that? And can you explain what happened? Those kinds of things." So I had decades of that stuff, and it ended up when she sent me the thing, single spaced, it was 5,000 pages. So that's what I had to start with. It was more an editing job than it was but I knew that this is what people that are my biggest fans, kind of strongest, most loyal ones. This is what they ask about. And this is what they want to know. So I had a pretty strong idea of that side of what a memoir is. But the other really big thing, Joseph, is that like I was a reluctant rock star in a way, like I loved the idea of making music for a living and getting to play, and it was like, hey, dress up in these weird clothes and jump around, and you know, and I liked rock music. It was fun, but I liked all types of music. But heavy rock was like, yeah, okay, I can do this. Um, but the truth about my life is that from a memoir perspective, it wasn't a life where I was just a rock star. You've alluded to the fact that I was a college professor for a couple of decades. I wrote a guitar magazine column monthly for 12, 13 years. As long as I was in the band, I wrote a column in Guitar Player. Although they were they weren't at the same time. I was in Triumph from 75 to 88, and I wrote the column from about 1980 to about 1993. Um, so um, yeah, I'd done a lot of things, and so when I decided, well, I'm going to write a memoir, I was going to write about my life. I was going to write about how important my family was to me, and the book kind of, as it formed, I realized, and to your question, which is, what do you leave out and what do you put in? I realized that there was a kind of a moral story that was being told here, where it was like I was leaning on the idea of virtues as opposed to vice, and about avoiding the 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 excesses of rock and roll and the pitfalls of it, and you know um and I think there's a quote somewhere in the book where I talked about, you can either sort of, in your life, you can choose shortcuts, you can try to go for shortcuts, or you have to take the high road, and the high road is longer, and it's probably a little colder. The low road and the shortcut they seemed dark and dangerous to me, and I was not interested in that. And I wanted to take the road that was just better lit, you know. So that's kind of what the book ended up sort of being about. Was yeah, maybe I'm not your conventional rock star, but what is a conventional rock star? Joseph, tell me what you think a conventional rock star is, because I don't think there is a mold or anything. I think everybody that has a success story in show business, it's probably a unique story, because no two stories are the same. You can't necessarily follow a formula that somebody else has followed and have that be the. I mean, the kids get up and sit and sing in front of the American Idol judges, and those judges go, I want you to be yourself. I want you to find your own voice. I really want you to try and, you know, yes, you're going to copy people because that's the format of our show, but that's not what we want. We don't want you to just be, a Mariah Carey copy. I want you to find out who you are and be you. So when you write a memoir, that's essentially what you're doing. You're kind of going, who was I? What am I now? What will I be tomorrow? That's what you're sort of trying to answer. Ooh, that was a long answer. I'm tired.
Yeah. So, obviously you've made a lot of albums in your whole career if you count everything Triumph, solo, and everything else in between there. Um, when it came down to like album sequencing, like which track should go first. I mean, obviously I'm guessing it was different from when you were in Triumph as to oppose your solo albums. Who actually was the one that kind of selects something like that? Is that something that you were involved in or had any say in, or how did that run?
No, I always had a say. And, obviously by the time I was making my own independent records, 1995, 96, I didn't have to consult with anybody. I would just make my own decisions about how I wanted it to run. But there's kind of, we were just talking about convention. There's kind of conventional ways that albums sequence. It's like you're looking for something that's a good opening the door, hey, how you doing kind of track that's, or an introduction to what the album is going to sort of be. Or you're trying to go, okay, this is kind of the most accessible commercial poppy kind of a thing I've got. And so I want to lead the proceedings with that. Now, that's not always convention because sometimes you bury that, and of course, when the Beatles were doing their thing, a lot of the singles they would put out, they wouldn't even put them on albums. That they would record singles and put singles out, and then when they were in doing an album, they do an album, and then there would be singles on the album. And of course, the Beatles were a band where it was pretty much every song on the record could have ended up being a single until it finally got to a sort of a Revolver was kind of when it started getting, hey, we're an album oriented band. Um, and that changed things. But as far as sequencing goes, when you're doing vinyl albums, that's a different thing than when you're doing, like a CD, because vinyl albums, you had to make sure that you didn't have too many heavy tracks that had heavy bottom end with a lot of bass and kick drum and stuff on the tracks that were, closest to the label in the middle of the album. So, or at the end of a side. So, you wanted the heavier stuff to be at the beginning of a record or in the middle of the side. You didn't want it towards. So then conventionally you sort of had softer songs and ballads and little guitar pieces and things that would go at the end of a side because the grooves weren't going to get cut as deep into the lacquer when they were cutting the vinyl. So that was a thing that would sometimes affect running orders. But I mean, the other back to convention, Keith Moon of The Who once said, the best way to do a set is start with a bang and end with a bang, and then everything in the middle doesn't matter for shit. That was kind of his philosophy. And there is a kind of a show business thing where that's kind of the way you're trying to, make things happen. Like you're going to start at the beginning and have this sort of introduction where you're trying to get everybody's attention and then you're hoping that you'll hold it, but You might not, but then by the end, oh, we want a climax where everybody's paying attention again. Now the other thing that's conventional is a sort of narrative thread. Things kind of subdivide into threes, and I used to teach this for songwriting and blah blah blah. Um, but if I'm going to make a speech, speech has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. An essay. That's how it subdivides. If we go to see a play, there's going to be Act One, Act Two, and Act Three. That's kind of the way things subdivide. There's three chunks of stuff. So an album wasn't much different. You had a beginning and a middle and an end, and in the middle, that would be where you'd be shuffling things around and going, well, both of these songs are in the key of E, so let's not have them back to back. Or, well, this one's a shuffle and this one's kind of like a shuffle too, so let's separate those out. And you didn't want grooves or keys necessarily, but sometimes a key would be a good thing to. You could go from one thing to another because they would be in the same key. The first Triumph album, there was a song called "Blinding Light Show" was in E minor, and then we didn't have enough material. And Levine says to me, "Have you got anything that's like a guitar piece or something?" I go, "I have a guitar piece in E minor." We could have the song go to a certain point, and then I could start the guitar piece, get to the end of the guitar piece, we could go back into the song. And he went, "That's great, we'll do that." So the guitar piece Moonchild was in the middle of Blinding Light Show because they were both in the key of E minor. So, sometimes that's the way it plays, and sometimes you're deciding, yeah, I don't want two keys back to back. I want to shift things. And of course you're raising the issue too of eras, like back in the cutting of lacquer days, vinyl album days, you'd have a guy that would be sitting there going, "So how much space do you want between the songs?" And you go, "Yeah," well, which is mastering. It's
Mhm.
you're trying to make a decision about how big of a gap do you want. Um, and sometimes by the time you get to CDs, you don't need any gap if you don't want it. You can drop cues wherever you like in the digital ones and zeros pathway. Um, but sometimes you go, yeah, that song, it had a nice long fade. The next one we're gonna, it starts with a kick-ass big bang. So let's let a nice little space, sit there for a while before the bang happens because we don't want to, scare people. But those are the kinds of decisions you're making when it comes to sequencing.
I just want to bring up the main thing I brought that up was I want to talk about the Spiral Notebook album. That one is, I think that the way you got it started off with those first three songs, I mean, that was just perfect. Those three songs, they seem to just keep flowing and keeps the album going off in a good direction right off the start.
Thank you. I'm glad you like that. Now, I worked pretty closely with a guy named Marty Anderson on that album. Marty was kind of like the engineer that did he was my keyboard player, but he also engineered the demos that we did. And then some of those demos, we literally just took them and transferred the tracks on over onto the 24 track 2-inch tape that we had as the master. So, and then Marty would have consulted on that. But the thing, a Spiral Notebook, as I recall, there were some tracks on that were kind of very intellectual, heady kind of singer songwriter stuff and ballads. So that stuff is obviously going to end up deeper in the record. And I'm trying to remember did the record start with "A Little Bit of Love"? Was that the
Anything you say,
Oh, anything you say, right, right. So, and that was the most poppy song that we sort of had. So I was okay. Let's open the door and go. Hey, here's the pop song. And then what was the next one?
and then it went to Raise High.
Oh yeah, yeah, groove. See, I
Hmm.
was in love with that reggae feel. I just thought that was the coolest vibe. That cha-cha, cha, cha-cha, cha, cha-cha. I thought that's a nice thing for a second track in on a record. I always felt second song of a set live or second song on a record, the groove should be really good. Like if the second song starts and the drummers go like boom ba bap ba boom ba bap ba boom ba bap, and there's this shuffle thing that's starting. It's like, yeah, everybody's gonna get into that. That's a good thing. Like if you had a song that started like a smoke on the water, like a it's got
You
this
know,
groove that's with like to me, groove is really a critical thing in how music should work, how records should sequence, how shows should be put together. And what was the third song in the
Oh,
after Razor?
uh, the one that you really like, "The Longing."
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah. So my one of my favorite songs that I ever wrote and recorded. So it was like I'm going, well, that's an important song to me. I want that to happen early. But the thing too about that track, and this is something I haven't mentioned yet, it had atmosphere, it had texture. That song had when you're a recording artist and what you're engaging in is the art of making records. To me, that song had really done a good job of capturing where my recording art was at. Like what I felt was one of the best, um, yeah, one of the best sort of periods in time, moments in time in my life as a creative artist. And Karen LeBlanc sang the background things in the middle bridge of that. And that was just this incredibly gorgeous, rich, like tapestry of thing. And Marty had a big hand in helping me arrange that for her to sing and record all of the tracks of her voice doing that. I just felt like, all right, I don't want people to miss this. Let's front end load it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the, unheralded gems there, out of your catalog that I think, a lot of people never really were able to listen to it or hear it because, like you said in your book, how the Spiral Notebook didn't really sell, what we were, what you were hoping for, and it's amazing because that is probably to me, out of all the solo albums that you did, that's actually the strongest. And it's weird because looking back, I always thought Absolutely was like the best one. And then the more I listened to with songs like The Longing and everything, it just, stands out a lot more now, looking back, to me at least.
Well, thank you. It may be that your sensibilities are songwriter oriented. Would that be a fair thing to say? Like in
Possibly.
your collection, do you like the records of songwriters, say more than I don't know, electric guitar players like Joe Satriani, kind of Steve
Yeah.
Vai, that kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. So to me, that record was a very songwriter oriented. Like I literally and intentionally didn't want to have a lot of guitar solos on that record. Wasn't going to be doing the Guitar Hero virtuoso kind of thing. The only moment it happens is on the hardest part on the tag. I kind of reverted to yeah, just let the tape roll and I'll just blow my brains out. So that side of my personality, I think, is also the closest to me as a person, which is not to say me as a performer or me as a musician or guitar player or something, but just me as a person. I think that's kind of closest to my character and personality. Yeah, and I mean, well, when I was writing the line, there's a package coming out called Diamonds, which it's a compilation of the harder rock tracks from that absolutely through to Spiral Notebook period of my life. And people can order that now at merch. There's the commercial. Um, but that that idea of when I was writing the liner notes, that idea of sort of being the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time had sort of become the leitmotif of my career. That like my absolutely came out and then made the nice big deal in the United States for the record on Charisma, and Charisma went bankrupt like 2 weeks after the record. They serviced Saved by Love to FMAR radio in the States. Then the label went bankrupt. It was like, well, so much for that one. What's
Yeah.
plan B? And there were a lot of points in my life where it was like, well, plan B was kind of more, that could have been the title for the memoir. You know, go to plan B. Like leaving Triumph was a thing where there were a lot of people that went like, "What are you doing? Are you have you lost your mind? Like why would you do that?" You know? But to me it was like, "No, no. Like plan B is definitely the only thing that makes sense to me at this point. Like I can't stay, you know." So that one was sort of on me, but in other circumstances, you know, plan B would just kind of drop out of the sky like the cartoon anvil on, you know, on the onto the characters like, oh, okay, well, I guess Wile E. Coyote's got to go to plan B.
All right, well, you mentioned the longing. I was actually going to ask about a couple other songs through your career here, just to get your quick take on them real fast and how you feel about them. But first one is the one that I feel is the unheralded gem of the Triumph catalog, and I that was Just a Game, the song. Tell us about that song and how you were able to write such a powerful song at such a young age there.
I honestly, I think part of it was that we had, you know, traveled to New York um, for the Rock and Roll Machine release, and I'd got the sense of, oh my God, you know, RCA Records and this building, and then these people that work here that are like, you know, the head of national promotion and the head of marketing and the vice president in charge of, you know, who's a what's its. And like, I went, man. And then the idea of how do you get songs on the radio? And it just seemed like, yeah, I'm not really in charge of my own life anymore. And of course, you know, when I had joined Triumph, I was kind of the junior partner in the band, you know, like, so in a way, my career wasn't really my own. It was being determined by my partners who were kind of more like the managers of the band and stuff. And I'm not complaining about that. I'm just, you know, stating, well, that's kind of the way it was. So the song came up from that. It was kind of like, well, you know, I'd now sort of been able to see. Uh, we'd had the song Rocky Mountain Way do good at radio in Canada, at AM radio, even like it had crossed over and become a. So we've been able to move up from being sort of small theaters to be playing hockey rinks and arenas and stuff. And that whole sort of structuring of the architecture of business, I was becoming aware of it. And so that informed the lyric in a big way. Um, the other thing is that I really liked guys like Jimmy Page and the whole Led Zeppelin thing of being able to create layers so that if you had this, and you know, I'm trying to remember the tune, it had this arpeggiating. So it had a looping kind of arpeggio guitar thing that you could put all kinds of layers of stuff on it. And I did. There were slide guitars and there was, you know, um, so the song ended up having a kind of a, and it was minor key. It was in D minor, the saddest of all keys, according to Spinal Tap. Um, but it did have that kind of that you know you how did you describe it? Powerful. It has a kind of a D minor has a kind of a dark, almost like folk ballady kind of. Here's the tale of the terrible, horrible things that happened. You know, like it's got that D minor kind of thing to it. So the song ends up having a little bit of that kind of, ooh, this is like the minstrel ballad, you know, heavy duty kind of song. Um, but then again, the song has the payoff of the song is that I'm saying, hey, all I can do is play, you know, um, which that's kind of like resigning myself to my fate, which is to say, yeah, you know, what's the I'm trying to think of the thing that when guys go through the 12 steps and they have to prayer, you know, God grant me the, you know, the strength for this and the serenity for that and the, you know, and like please God, don't let me tilt at windmills. Don't let me try to spend a lot of energy trying to change things that I can't change. You know, and so in a sense, that song is a little bit kind of a serenity prayer that it's going like, yeah, well, what can I do? What can I do if the head of national promotion has a cocaine problem? That's it's not really my thing that I can fix, you know. Uh, I'll just have to kind of live with that. How will I deal with that? Well, I think I'll write a song in the key of D minor, you know. So that was that.
So is there a reason why you guys didn't get to play that one live too often at all? Was it hard to play or something?
Well, certainly with all the layers of guitar and stuff. I mean, as a trio in those days, you could really only take a crack at the things that either had been recorded, thinking about it being a track that a trio could carry live, or was a song that could translate to um, being a three-piece thing live and work really well. But there are two other factors that spring to mind right away. First of all, airplay. If a song doesn't get a lot of airplay, it's usually not going to be in the set list, right? Because you're going to be playing the stuff from your last couple of albums that got a lot of airplay, and people buy their ticket and go, "Well, I hope they play that song because that's why I bought my ticket." You're like, I mean, once we'd had that Just a Game album, um, Lay It on the Line and Hold On had become, you got to play them every night. And Triumph didn't play Hold On every night because in truth, the trio didn't do a very good job of playing it. And then after a while, Gil and Mike said, "Rik, just do it like as an acoustic thing in the set." And so it was on the live album as an acoustic thing because that was the only way we ever played the song, if and when it was in the set, because we would maybe have a promoter or a local radio station saying, "Hey, I hope you're playing Hold On. I hope Hold On's in the set." Like in St. Louis, we had to play Hold On because it had gone #1 in the market. Like literally, it was the only city in all of North America where Hold On had gone to #1. So we had to play it. Um, but otherwise, it wouldn't be in the set list. So you're partly right that, it would be what the band could execute. But the other thing is, Triumph, we were a very production heavy band. And so you kind of wanted to have songs that were either dramatically, moody ballads that were then going to explode. And we had a lot of songs that did, the whole Stairway to Heaven thing where you start like a whisper and eventually it's going bang, bang, chicky, chicky, bang, bang, chicky, chicky, bang, bang, bang. Like it gets big and it gets heavy. Um, and so Triumph, we had been a Zeppelin copy band when we were a bar band. That had been a pretty strong model for us. And so those were the longer songs that the ones that ended up going bang bang were the ones that we would use. Ones that kind of like Just a Game never really went bang bang. It just had this kind of loping it sat there for its entirety. Um, it was about other things. It wasn't about going bang bang. But Triumph Live was a band that blew off a lot of flash pots and had to have lasers and so
All right, well, let's go to the next song. Say Goodbye. Tell us about that one. That's another one you guys never really played live as well.
yeah. You're gonna have a lot of songs in that category, Joseph.
Yes.
um, yeah, uh, yeah. Say Goodbye. Gilmore was not necessarily sold on having that on the album. I think it came to a vote, and Mike and I voted to have it. Um, and it was because um, I felt it was a strong kind of pop song with a pop sensibility. And Gil kind of didn't necessarily want the band to be a pop kind of crossover band. He wanted it to be heavier. I think if he'd had his drug, well, the proof of the pudding was after I left and they made an album called Edge of Excess. It was heavy. It was like Gil kind of wanted to have a Judas Priest, Motley Crue ish, Van Halen ish kind of a, not really Van Halen, but more like Judas or Motley Crue or Ted Nugent maybe, Bad Company. He kind of liked straight ahead, heavy hard rock, bluesy kind of rock. So pop songs, man, and Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else I can tell you about that. The songs like that would hardly ever be considered for the again, it was an airplay thing. There were some markets where "Say Goodbye" got played, but not
Yeah.
much. But a fan favorite, fans of the band, that had bought albums, they really liked that tune. It had longer legs than, some of the other tracks from the album, so that decades later, when I was touring acoustically, we pulled that one out of mothballs one night, Dave Dunlop and I, and the crowd loved it. Everybody was singing along. I got the one of the part of the crowd to sing the "Don't say you love me, don't say you need me." So I had them singing that, and then I had the girls sing the harmony above it, and then I did those descant lines, the "Say goodbye," while the crowd was going, "Don't say you love me." So it was great. It was like, oh, this was a pretty good tune. It, it should have been one of the right things in the right place at the right time back in the day, but it wasn't.
Yeah, speaking of songs that hopefully were you surprised that A World of Fantasy didn't do better than what it did?
Um, well, yes and no. Uh, Certainly that was a very transitional album for us, the Never Surrender album, and we were starting to be unhappy with RCA, and so but that song only got airplay in certain markets as a kind of an FM lead track. Some people didn't want to touch it, and I think maybe it was because there were some markets where people were starting to shy away from vocals that were going up there into nosebleed territory. You know, like radio stations didn't like it if their signal was making the dogs around the neighborhood begin to howl. Now, I'm being facetious, but there is an element to that I think maybe that vocal. If the song was in D minor, um, if we detuned the guitars, uh, because I did it in D minor because of the way the riff was. You had to kind of have the open D string resonating as I was playing the riff. Um, yeah, I don't know. You live and you learn. I think World of Fantasy was also a kind of a plowing song. Na, na, it was a boom, whack. And sometimes one of the things that happens is you put out a song and there's already a song that radio is playing the shit out of that's going boom, whack, boom, and so they go, well, the programmer, the music director at a radio station decides, no, we're going to keep playing the AC/DC song that goes boom, whack, or the Journey song that goes boom, whack, boom. Like we already got that groove and that tempo and that. So we don't want another one like that. We already got one that's, in heavy rotation. So yeah, again, wrong thing, wrong time.
And the last song I'll ask about is Killing Time. I just like this song, the way you and Gil trade off on the lyrics. And how did you guys arrive at that to decide to switch off on them? And it's kind of unlike any other Triumph song in that aspect.
Yeah. Okay. So what had happened was after Never Surrender, Gil had made it kind of very clear that he didn't want to be the drummer in Rik Emmett's band. It was his band, and he wanted to be a lead singer of as many commercial hits. So songs that were, and then when we were shopping around the Thunder 7 record, which eventually landed with MCA, which became Universal. When we were in pre-production for that, and I was writing tunes and bringing them to pre-production, Gil hadn't written much, and so then it was a question of, so how do we get Gil into this record? And I was 100% with the program, and the program was, well, let's, there was a bit, Chicago Transit Authority, which became Chicago. They had multiple singers. They had songs that had come out where you had one guy sing the verse, another guy sing the B verse. It wasn't unusual that um, that had happened. Although it was okay, it was unusual. It wasn't because the standard commercial thing is you got to have a singer out front that fronts the band, and so that was a problem that Triumph had because the drummer really did want to be the front man, if he could, whenever he could. So anyhow, in the pre-production for those things, uh, "Killing Time" was the song where Gil and I'd written the song "Follow Your Heart," but then Gil sort of took it over. He was going to be the guy that sang the verses, and then when it got to the chorus, um, Gil couldn't hit those. You got to follow your heart in the choruses, so I sang those. And I think I'm trying to remember if there were other ones that we shared. I guess not. I guess as time goes by was just me. And anyways, it was a conscious attempt to try and get Gil's voice onto the record more.
And you also did like that adjoining piece, Time Cannon, which is like the precursor. How did that all arrive at? That was kind of unique for you guys at the time.
You say you guys, but the other guys aren't on that. Like the other
Oh.
guys, first of all, they've been fighting a lawsuit
Hmm.
in New York against RCA, which we lost. Then they decided, well, now we got to find a white knight, other record company who will buy us away from RCA for $3 million. So we were shopping the record, and those guys were on planes and going to LA and going to New York and trying to find somebody that would want to buy the band. And I was alone in the studio, and I was left to my own devices. And I went, "This is great." And so I was doing things like Little Boy Blues was all me. I had a drum machine, and I thought, well, I can when the song gets really big, I can get Gil to play the drums as an overdub, but I can lay down this Lynn drum. I'll play the bass guitar, I'll play guitar, I'll play a lead blues guitar part, and this will be a song on the record. I wrote the song "Stranger in a Strange Land," and then killing. I knew we had this Killing Time, and in a certain key. So then I thought, oh well, I'll build this thing that's like the way Queen just builds these, you know, huge choir things. Multi tracks of vocal takes, and I sang my own harmonies, and I just went nuts. And that probably I spent maybe 3 or 4 days, in the studio making that and mixing that and turning that into something. And I think there's 48 tracks of vocal, probably more, because I would do a part like go time, time. I would sing that for 4 minutes. Just going time, time, and then I would double it. So I would two voices stereo going time, 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 and then I have one that goes time, 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 time. And so I started building the parts, but I would always double them and triple them. And so then we bounce them down and mix them down to say a stereo pass of maybe 8 tracks. And then I'd start again. And I do new parts, and then I do other parts. And I was kind of building them, I think, 4 to 8 tracks at a time kind of thing, and then bouncing them down in order to make it happen. Me and Ed Stone. God bless Ed. He put up with a lot of nonsense from me, but it was fun. I was literally. It was like going to a postgraduate school for me as a recording artist, learning how to be a recording artist, like pushing myself, and to do things that would have been, it was for the making of album oriented music. And wouldn't you know it, radio was starting to get away from it. Album oriented rock was starting to become more singles oriented, more commercial. The like in the year that Thunder Seven was out and we were touring on it, the Heart album that Ron Nevison had done, which I think it was just called Heart,
Mhm.
which had, what about love? I don't want to care about you. And these dreams go on when I close my eyes. Those huge pop hits. And that's what FM radio had started to become a format that's what they were playing. That's what they were doing. And it was like, they weren't going to play. Time Cannon was never going to get played by anybody. But, I felt it had bona fide kind of stuff about it, that it was an artist doing what an artist should do in a recording studio if they've signed a contract that defines you as a recording artist.
Well, this takes us perfectly right here because obviously talked about Thunder Seven. Seemed everything seemed to be rolling along pretty nicely. Then all of a sudden, Sport of Kings came about. Do you feel that the record company MCA, which was famously known as Music Cemetery of America, do you feel that they kind of like just started not promoting you guys as heavily?
No, although they didn't have the clout that other companies did. So when it came to things like, you know, could they strong arm their way onto MTV rotation? No, they lacked the strength and the size and the power. But the irony of that is that eventually MCA became Universal, and now Universal is pretty much the the biggest, largest record. They just kept buying, um, like they bought Motown, during that time period. So they would keep buying things so that they kept growing, even though they didn't necessarily have a lot of strength. Well, they were going to get indie labels or smaller labels, and then they were going to have catalogs that were undeniable. Um, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So, Sport of Kings, I think it was just that somebody's out there. It did pretty good. It charted, um, and I think it got up into the 20s on Billboard, and which was the highest charting thing we'd ever had.
Yeah.
So you can't really blame them. But I blame the band in the sense that the follow-ups were just not as strong. And Gil had lobbied hard for the fact that he was going to be the vocalist on the song "Just One Night," which was a song that Ron Nevison had brought to the project, which to me had hit single kind of all over it. So Gil wanted to be the singer, and I felt that I should sing it. If I sang it, I thought it would have a shot at being a hit. But Gil sang it, and it wasn't a hit when we put it out. Because Gil's voice had not become something that radio had already been grown accustomed to. And it's not Gil's fault. It's definitely just the way that the music business is. If you're a band and you've already put out 4 or 5 albums and they've already had hits, and there's a guy in the band it's his voice, and his voice is unique, which is to say mine, and that's the sound of the band. And so now here comes this single, and they're going, "That's Triumph? That doesn't sound like Triumph," because there's an incredibly shallow thing that exists at the music director, program director level of radio, and that wasn't MCA's fault. You know, that was just radio kind of going, "Yeah, we're not going there."
Did you ever
So
get a take on it at all? Did you ever do a vocal for it, or it never got that far?
never really got that far. There was a moment when Nevison had approached me and said, "Hey, make sure this is getting cut in the key that you can sing it in best." And I went, "Ron, that's never going to fly. You have no idea about the politics of this band." You know, he goes, "Well, you just leave that to me." I go, "I'll leave it to you, but 2 weeks from now, you're going to be on a plane flying home, and you're going to be, depending on who tells the story, fired or quit." And that's exactly what happened. So it's not like I was Karnak. As soon as he was starting to think that he could, push Mike and Gil around, he was sadly mistaken.
All right. Well, following that, obviously, you guys came up with Surveillance, but it just seemed like after that album, it just like the promotion for everything with MCA just didn't seem like they were doing, what you needed them to do because Surveillance, I don't even think we even heard anything out here in Buffalo at all off of it
Yeah,
on the radio, except for maybe Q107, maybe, you know.
yeah, no, that it's true. That I do think Surveillance was very much a contractual obligation album. It was like they didn't have any uh, choice. They had to give us the budget to make the record. They wanted to get the record. They needed to put the record out in order to fulfill the contract. But it was like there was a Monty Python album that was called the Contractual Obligation Album. It would have been a good title for Surveillance.
All right. So when you left and went on your own, did you know that obviously you probably knew you'd have to start back up on the ladder and climb your way up again, started to play over smaller venues and clubs. Uh, were you all prepared for that?
Yeah, in a way. I mean, I think every artist, well, maybe not every artist, but I think most artists sort of always have a thing inside themselves where when you're putting out an album, you've got this little, you know, little candlelight that's burning inside your soul. It's like, oh, this is going to be great. Everyone's going to love this. This is going to become huge. Everyone, yeah, this is undeniably great for so many reasons. And then, reality sets in, and it doesn't really happen. So, um, I knew that I was going to have to step down, but then I always felt like, and then it'll just be a few steps back up again. But I think it didn't take me long. I got out on the first sneak preview tour in '89, even, and there were things that happened where I went, oh, this is what it's going to be like. I did a bunch of dates in Canada where I opened for Kim Mitchell, and I went, oh, when you're an opening act, it's a different story. Like I would win an encore from the audience, and then the house lights would come on and the PA would turn off. I was like, oh, we'd have to walk off stage, you know, and I go, oh, okay, I see, I get it. So after the Charisma went bankrupt and stuff, but you know, I'm sitting here now as a 70-year-old man who's written his memoir. When you look back, you gain a certain amount of perspective on things, right? The amount of time from 1990 to 1993, 94, it's not a lot of time. And that was definitely, um, let's use your metaphor of a ladder. You're stepping off of one ladder and going down a few rungs onto another ladder that's the same size ladder, and you're thinking, I'm going to climb this. And then you start to realize, wait, this isn't the same size ladder. It doesn't go as far. Oh, the rungs aren't quite as wide. And then somebody says, sorry, you don't belong on this ladder. You have to go. And you turn and you look. And the next one is one of those step ladders that you use to reach the high shelves in your kitchen. And you go, oh, that certainly seems like a demotion. And so, but you step over on that ladder, by God, and then somebody says, yeah, I'm sorry, you don't belong on this ladder either. You're gonna have to step down, and you turn, and there's the curb. It's the difference between the street and the sidewalk. And you go, well, okay, I, who am I to take on airs and think that I deserve better? I'm gonna get right down there in the gutter and climb up that fucking sidewalk. So, um, that's kind of how it plays out. But in truth, I can also tell you that I was not unhappy um, to be down there doing that and being independent and have like it was like that was my lot in life, and those were the cards that I got dealt. And I go, okay, that same guy that wrote the song "Just a Game," where we said, "Hey, all I can do is play." I was still that guy going, hey, all I can do is play. That's what I'll do. That's that's what I'm here for. Um, and you can't take that away from me. I can always play my guitar somewhere. And in the end, I'm not. The first band I had when I did Absolutely, I had like six pieces and a female sax player and another like I had 8 rooms on the road and three guys on the traveling as the crew. And by the time I was finished, it was me and Dave Dunlop playing duo gigs with Dave road managing. Was like, yeah, okay, I get it. It's fine. I can do it.
Since looking back, just give us a top memory of a show you played here in Buffalo that you can remember looking back here, other than the one that you mentioned in your book.
What was the one I mentioned in the book?
About the guitar festival where the
Oh, George Benson.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, come on, that's a great story. No, I mean, geez, I can remember. Oh, I can remember the band playing McVan's,
Oh wow.
which was a club in down, yeah, in the early days. It was a tiny little club. We were a tiny, and like I remember the dressing room. It had pipes that like ran through it if you didn't watch it, you'd bang your head on the pipes and stuff. And I think McVan's had probably been a club that had been around since the 30s or the 40s or something. And and we used to play after dark out in Lockport,
Hmm.
and we played that a couple of times. And but honestly, there was one gig where we played the War Memorial like downtown, and the Odd, isn't that what everybody
Yep.
called it? The Odd, yeah. And but the earlier in the day, we had gotten the key to the city, and I think Mike was maybe somewhere doing a radio thing, and Gil and I went, and we were in the mayor's office with Eddie Tice from Harvey and Corky,
Mhm.
and they gave us the key to the city, and Eddie was driving us around, and Eddie was like so proud because he kind of brought the band up. We played Klein Hands, and we'd done really well and sold out, and then we'd moved up to this war memorial thing. And I think it was maybe the first time we played. It could have been the second, but I remember coming out of the dressing room, which was sort of at the end of the building, and getting up and getting onto the stage, and the place was just rocking, like it was just so loud. And I was thinking, man, this is where the Sabres play hockey. This is the big building in Buffalo, and tonight we own it. Like this is our building, and these people love us. And I just remember that feeling of being on the stage, which is a feeling that I'd had, all the hockey rinks that are around the Great Lakes, like the first time it happened in Detroit. No, obviously the first time it happened in Maple Leaf Gardens. But that feeling was pretty special, to be going, man, you know, we own this town, And of course, it's hubris, like you're being a little bit egocentric, but that's kind of the nature of the beast, right? That part of what you're going to do is get up there and be a peacock and strut around for a while and do your thing, and that's what people have paid for. They go, I hope he struts around and does his thing, and I hope they blow off a lot of flashpots, and like, and we would deliver, but we always got really strong support out of 97 Rock and stuff. And, you know, um, yeah, the big rock radio stations in town. So Buffalo was always a pretty special place to play. I can remember, I have some pictures of we used to get limos out of Toronto to bring our family members down. And so
Mm.
they would get to cross the Peace Bridge in a limo, and then show up at the Buffalo Park, the limos, and my brother in a limo, going like, hey, look at me, like those were always pretty special kind of gigs.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to mention before I let you go here? Any other
No, I'm done.
projects? Anything coming up? No albums come that Diamonds one you mentioned?
Yeah, that's coming up. So that's out, or people can order that at Rock Paper Merch, uh, um, and yeah, Merch in Motion, and let me see what else. Of course, the book is available on Amazon or ECW Press, and your local independent bookseller. Get them to order it. Um, and I'm working on a thing called 10 Telecaster Tales, which is a guitar instrumental, all fingerstyle. But I'm writing a book that goes along with it, so it's kind of be a book record kind of a thing. And I'm going to Sweden for the for the Junior World Hockey Championships, and I'm playing in a band there on New Year's Eve. Um, so I'm going to sing
Well,
3 Triumph songs that we've rearranged with string quartet and horns and everything, and so that ought to be a trip. And but I'm also going to be in the house band, so I'm going to sing a Paul McCartney song, and I'm going to sing backgrounds on Cool and the Gang, and like that's going to be a riot. Like I'm going to have a lot of fun. But I've been working on the book for that, like putting together my charts, because I'll be like a guy on stage reading charts, But it'll be fun. I haven't played a live gig in years, so yeah, that'll be crazy.
any book signings planned or anything like that?
There's nothing in the immediate future. There's one that's in Brampton, Ontario, Canada, in April. April 9, I think, is the date, and I'm going to be interviewed there, and talk like I I'm not like Getty where I can book a 14 date tour and get somebody that's a celebrity media person to interview me in every market. And yeah, I'm not really, you know, ECW press is not really they don't punch at the kind of weight that Harper Collins does, so, but that's all right. I wouldn't want to ever seem like I'm envious about Rush, that's it's all good, but
Oh
they
yeah.
were definitely. It's funny how some people think of the bands in the same league, but we were never in the same league. Like
Well,
Rush was a band that was above the stratosphere, up there with your Pink Floyds and your Led Zeppelins and your, you know,
well, bands from the late '70s to the '80s, Canadian bands. There's no doubt you guys were thought of as the top two in my estimation. You know,
nice, thank you.
and you guys were both three-piece, so that was another thing there.
Yeah,
So
with lead singers that sang really high, so yeah, I know, and the guitar player was blonde in both bands. Like, okay, but
eh,
those are fairly superficial and shallow kinds of similarities. Beyond that, the bands were pretty different. Like musically, we weren't trying to do the kinds of things that they were doing. Like maybe in our early stages, when both bands were young, there were kinds of similarities there because obviously they did take some inspiration from Zeppelin, and so did we. But as once we'd sort of established our own, identities, it was like my hands are moving off screen now.
all right. Well, Rick, I really appreciate the time and good luck with the book there, and hope to see you down the road at one of these book signings if you end up doing them.
All right, thanks, Joseph.